Welcome, everyone, to our ongoing series of short talks by faculty of the Arava Institute. It is one of the important ways in which we get to share and engage you in their work and our work that is so important, both on the scientific side, on the socioeconomic side, and the work we do to make it real on the ground to help the environment and to build peace. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, our speaker is Elli Groner, Dr. Elli Groner. He is the scientific director of the Dead Sea and Arava Science Center and an ecologist at the Center for Hyper-Arid Socioecology at the Arava Institute. He specializes in hyper-arid ecosystem processes, especially ecohydrology. You can ask him what those things mean, don't ask me. He works on the concept of desert ecosystems integrity that evaluates the value of ecosystems based on self-organization. And this includes studying biodiversity, food webs, and how the ecosystems function. Elli also studies the interactions between human society and desert ecosystems, which is very interesting, especially as it includes not what we do to nature, but also what nature gives to people and conservation. He's very fond of beetles and found a new species that is now named after him, Brachyceras groneri. Elli has been teaching desert ecology at the Arava Institute for 17 years and was the academic director from 2005 to 2016. He lives in Mitzpe Ramon, and we always get to visit him when we're on the Israel ride with his wife and his 3 children. Elli, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to learning from you. I just remind you all, please stay on mute. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. We will address them at the end of Elli's talk. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Miriam. So I will start. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you all of you for joining me. So we'll start with some pictures. You're welcome to write whatever you think in the chat. Just open the chat and write. It's a way of conversation. And my question is, which of those pictures were taken from in the Arava? So if you want to gamble or guess, just write in the chat which number. I'll give you a clue. Only one of them was written in the Arava. And I'll tell you what the others were. One of them was taken from Mars. One of them and 2 of them from the Negev. So here are the answers. There haven't been any people to Mars yet. So number 2 was not Mars, but this is an experiment, a simulation to landing on Mars that happened in the Negev. So the next question is, what is a desert? So if you want to write in the chat any one word that comes into mind when you think of a desert, what is a desert? Just write what comes to mind. If you're not sure, maybe you can write desert ecology, what comes to mind? What would you associate it with? Is this a desert? Is this a desert? Are they all desert? Is this a desert? So a little bit about what's going on. This is a paper that shows that in the last 50 years, actually this was done in 2010, and until then, from 1949 to 2013, actually, precipitation has gone down dramatically. So we are seeing in climate change situation where the rain is being reduced. Extreme events are happening much more droughts, floods are stronger, even costing lives in Israel and Jordan. And we ask ourselves, how does this climate change affect the desert ecosystem, maybe differently to how it affects the rest of the world? And should we do anything locally? Obviously, we want to stop climate change in the world, globally. But locally, in the desert, is there anything we should do? Should we water the desert to compensate for the water that we are losing. So the whole issue of management of desert is really tricky because we really have to understand how the desert functions in order to try and understand how to preserve it. So we're asking ourselves, what is a good desert and what is a bad desert? How about this? This is 2014, not what it says there, from the Evrona oil spill. This is oil spill that is one of the largest terrestrial oil spills. And this is obviously impacted the environment very badly. So that's straightforward. That's a bad environment. We want to clean it. We want to protect it. We want to prevent it happening. What about this one? This is a liman, coming from the Greek word of port, which is a place where we collect water and plant trees. Is this a good thing for the desert or a bad thing? So on one hand, it's not natural. On the other hand, like Ben Gurion said, we are greening up the desert. Organic farming, obviously organic farming is much better than regular farming, but is organic farming better for the ecosystem than nothing? Look at all those talks that are benefiting from organic farming. We have an organic farming in Neotz Madar and Samar, which are kibbutz in the Arava. So are these good things or bad things for the environment? And here's some quotes. Elon Soloway, which you probably all know, said, trees are good for desert. Any tree that can survive is good for forestation. Basically, she meant anywhere. And another farmer, if you have the know-how, you can turn the desert into heaven. So this is a clearly approach that the greener it is, the better it is. So how do we judge whether it's good for the desert or bad for the desert? Do we believe, like the farmers, that the more greening up, the better, and then climate change obviously dries up the desert, and that's something we have to fight? So a little bit about the desert. The word itself, desert, what do you think of the word desert? Okay, here's something from Jewish cultural desert. What do they mean when they say cultural desert? They mean nothing. Nothing is there, no culture in this example in Phoenix. Or when they say economic desert, they mean no money or no business. So the word desert is used almost like desert, like, so there's nothing there. So why do people associate deserts with nothing? Why? We look at this picture, there's so little of biomass, so little of life here. Why is it that desert is so harsh and extreme? Here's a map of the world with all the deserts of the world, or the 10 largest deserts you can see, and they are considered relatively empty. A desert is considered an area which receives less than 10 inches a year. If it's between 10 and 20 inches, it's semi-arid, and if it's below 70 millimeters, which is roughly 3 inches, it's hyper-arid. So why are most land bare in the desert? This is an aridity map. Aridity is precipitation divided by heat. So the hotter it is, the drier it is, aridity is increased. And you can see obviously Sahara and Saudi Arabia, which are hyper-arid. Australia and United States have arid, but they do not have hyper-arid. And the driest desert in the world is in Chile. Interesting, most of the world, the gradient is north to south. In the States, in the North America, it's actually east to west. This is the one in Israel. Most of Israel is relatively dry, but most of it, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Haifa, are semi-arid, aridity index between 50 and 20%. The Negev is between 20 and 5%, so that's arid. And the Arava in orange and the south of Israel is considered a hyper-arid. So the reason why the desert is so considered so extreme is because it is the furthest away characteristic from the origin of life. So life evolved in the ocean, and this is the history of our Earth. It's about 4.5 billion years, so 4,500 million years. And most of the history of Earth, we had life. life existed on Earth for almost the entirely history of the Earth, but only in the last less than 1 billion, we had the evolution of plants and animals and fungi. Most of the history, we were all bacteria and single cells in the ocean. This is how it should be shown. So plants, fungi, and animals in the last 800 million years, and most of the history of us, we were all developing in the ocean. So water is such a crucial element. And the move from the ocean, this is the 5 kingdoms of life, the bacteria, the single cells, and then the 3 more advanced plants, fungi, and animals. And each one of those groups conquered the desert recently, relatively. Fish became amphibians and reptiles and then mammals, and the same happened to arthropods and other creatures and plants, of course, but relatively recent. So the deserts are the most extreme characteristic, and so the most advanced adaptations are needed to live in such a place. So this is some pictures from I showed you before of the arid area. The arid area doesn't have dense vegetation, but everywhere you go, you can find vegetation, because at aridity level of above 5%, the soil moisture is sufficient for plants to grow. What happens below 5% is that the soil moisture is not enough for anything to grow. But we know that there is life in the hyper-arid. We know that there is life in the Arava. There's acacia trees and other things. So how come? What allows life to exist in the hyper-arid? And in one word, the answer is topography. Topography allows for a dynamic called source-sink. The source are the mountains and the slopes, and the sinks are the valleys, the bottom, which collects the water. And so in the sink, in the valleys, we have soil moisture much higher. If the hyper-arid was flat, we would get nothing. So in the hyper-arid, we get vegetation in the valleys at the bottom. And we have amazing plants which are adapted to that with strange adaptation. Okay, why do plants lose water? It's not through their skin, through their cuticle. Actually, almost all the plants can prevent water from being lost, from evaporating. The reason that the plants are losing water is that in photosynthesis process, what is photosynthesis? Photosynthesis is taking water with carbon dioxide from the air and light and producing sugar. And from that sugar, we can produce anything, proteins, fats, carbohydrates, and so on, and the plants secrete oxygen. And so in order to do that, they need carbon dioxide. And then they open small openings which allow, sorry, I'll just go back, which allows carbon dioxide to come in, and that's when the water is escaping. So that's the reason plants find it. And what is amazing about cacti, is that they have a very special mechanism that they take the carbon dioxide at night, keep it in their tissues, and then during the day when there is light, then they do the photosynthesis. So this is one amazing adaptation. Unfortunately, we don't have so many of these in Israel, but cactus are a great adaptation to absorbing carbon dioxide at night and then doing the photosynthesis during the day. These erect plants are, on one hand, exposing themselves to maximum light in the morning and the afternoon, but during the hot hours, the amount of surface that is exposing to the sun is very little. So that's another adaptation of plants. I just want to give you a taste of that. We move to animals, also amazing adaptation. Obviously burrowing during the hot hours to escape the desert. Phenology, which is timing. Timing is an amazing way. A lot of plants and insects have a mechanism that they are dormant using during the summer. You have something called hibernation, which bears can do in the winter. We have the opposite. We have estivation, which is dormant during the summer. And then when the rain comes, suddenly everything wakes up and you have germination very, very quickly. And the plants grow very quickly to produce seeds within a month before everything is dry again. So this is another adaptation to the desert. Long legs to get away from the heat. Even 2 centimeters, you can lose 5 degrees. So a lot of animals in the desert have long legs. This is an amazing beetle from Namibia, which in Namibia there is more dew than rain. So what they do, they collect dew in the early morning. They stand on their head, and dew is accumulating on their body, and they have small channels along their body that brings the water from the tail up to their mouth, and they drink the water that has been accumulated from the dew. So in the desert, we have dryness, heat, unpredictability, which is a big problem because one year we can get relatively a lot of rain, and then the next year we will get nothing. And low productivity and salinity. And plants can deal with it with physiology, morphology, phenology, which is timing, and so do animals. I want to finish with the food web or the food pyramid and talk about it. This is a normal food pyramid. We have a lot of plants, a fewer herbivores, and then even fewer predators because energy is lost. This is called the Newton's second law of thermodynamics, which you lose the energy because of inefficiency to heat, to movement, and so on. And this is a typical food pyramid. But in the desert, it's different because the rain is so unpredictable that herbivores find it very difficult to live there. So what happens is that there's very few herbivores and of course very few predators. So you would think there's no life, but what has evolved in the desert amazingly is a group of animals that can eat dry plant material. And these are called, I'll skip these are called detritivores. So they eat detritus, and this is the brown material. And on top of them, these are the detritivores, and then they're predators. So we can see these creatures. These are woodlice and termites, not furniture desert, but desert termites, and beetles, of course. And all of these are able to eat almost anything organic, dry leaves. And so when they have their own predators, the lizards and the scorpions and these sun spiders, which actually happen, can see the students always come across it in Torah. And so you have an amazing food web with detritivores that are eating the detritus, the dry material, and then the predators. And on top of that, we have the wolves and the hedgehogs and other and birds that are eating that. So I think I'll stop here asking what is how do we protect this healthy desert system? And the question, should we green it up or should we just maintain it with its pristine biodiversity, is not a question for a scientist, but actually maybe for a philosopher or a politician with many things to consider. Thank you very much.
Is that your beetle?
No. My beetle is a weevil.
Oh. I'm always interested in that, those kind of animals, like from a distance, you know, just as long as they, it's funny, I saw a mouse in the neighborhood the other day and my daughter was like, wait, that's not a chipmunk or a squirrel. What is it? I said, it's a mouse and it's welcome to be here outside.
Yeah.
It has all the room in the world as long as it stays out of my house. Ladies and gentlemen, do you have questions that you'd like to share with Elli? You can put them in the chat. I'm happy if you let me know you'd like to ask a question.
So I can already see a few comments about the desert, and that's lovely. A lot of people put little precipitation and even uncertainty, so somebody must be a scientist. I just want to say about sand that also in Israel, Many people associate deserts with sand, but in fact, at least in Israel, most deserts have very little sand. Sand is a rare habitat in the deserts of Israel. Most of it is different type of soil. We differentiate between sand, which is large grains, and dust, which is very small grains. And when you say sandstorm, usually you mean dust storm, because sand doesn't fly. Sand cannot cross oceans. It usually just jumps a little bit. What crosses oceans and what produces the soil that is so important for us is dust, which is just small grains, smaller than sand. So there isn't so much.
That's good to know, because last time we were on, no, a few years ago when we were on the Israel ride, we had a dust storm, but we would have called it a sandstorm, but now we've learned better.
Yeah.
But it was pretty in your face, as they say.
If it's above waistline, then it's probably dust. Usually sand, unless you're standing on a sand dune, which there are some in the Arava, but that's a habitat we really try to protect. Sand dunes, they're pretty rare.
Carl asked a question about, I think, about water management at the at Kibbutz Keturah, which is somewhat different from the Arava Institute. So the Arava Institute is on Kibbutz Keturah, but it is not Kibbutz Keturah. However, I'm happy to say there is a good symbiotic relationship in terms of contributing knowledge that comes out of the Arava Institute into things like date palms. I don't know if you heard the last lecture, Carl, but if not, we have it on recording about a new effort to introduce birds and bats as a natural insecticide in the date palms. It's a kind of good example of the integration of our research and work and the economy and plantings of the Arava. But Elli, you know more about the various things that have been tried over the years and their ecological possibilities and outcomes.
So I'm not a water person. I assume Clive either has been or will be giving talks. He's a water person. I'm not even an agriculture person, which Elaine and Jessica are, but I know a little bit. So date palms take a lot of water. They do take a lot of water. But and I always ask the people in the Arava, what is the limiting factor for your economics? Because most of the economics is based on agriculture. Is it water, land, or human power? Because sometimes workers could be a problem. And until now, it was mostly water, not so much land. And but water use efficiency, which is how much basically money you can make from a gallon of water, date palms are okay. They are taking a lot of water, but they are supporting almost all the Arava, except Yotveta, which is making most of its money from hot chocolates or cold hot chocolates. The rest of them make it from dates. So it's but Israel is going through a revolution with water right now. Until recently, almost all the water came from groundwater that were pumped up in the Arava, but now all of Israel is moving to desalination. So more and more of the water is coming from desalination, and at the moment it's mixed with local water. And I think all this is going to change. And they're talking about more and more of the natural land becoming agriculture because we can afford it because of the water. So that takes me to the next question about human interaction with nature. And then obviously the more agriculture, the less pristine land that we have. Miriam, you want to read some more questions?
Yeah, I just want to say about water also, one of the facts that is true is that Israel reuses 84% of its water for agriculture and other purposes. That makes it a multiple of the next country, which is Spain, in the 20s. And so it really is a very efficient water user as well. But desal is the water in the aquifer. I can answer Larry's question. This I know, the water in the aquifer has become very tired in the Arava, and so they are benefiting from desal and other water sources in Israel. What are your thoughts? I'm sorry, Mason asks, what are your thoughts on implementing green infrastructure as a means of watershed management and restoration in the Negev Arava region? I do want to say, before Ellie answers that, is one of the things we work with is Jordan, and they have noticed that our side of the Arava Valley is much greener than their side, and they have started an Arava, or what they call Wadi Arava, commission to see what they can do to sort of catch up or use that agricultural land in a very hot and very dry Jordan. But Ellie, to the question.
So before I answer Mason, I'll just refer to Larry's question about going back to the previous subject, which is desalination. And yeah, we do desalination in the Mediterranean, but also they started doing desalination in Eilat. And there's big talks about the Red Dead Canal, which might one day pump water and take it to the Dead Sea. But that's with the World Bank right now. We don't know if it will happen. But yes, desalination is happening in many places. Regarding Mason's question, we have a dilemma. On one hand, we want to develop Zionism and people moving into the Arava, and we would not like to have all the people in Israel living in the big cities in Tel Aviv. We definitely would like to see people living in the Arava, and critical mass is an important element of maintaining life in the Arava. And with it, we have to take care of income and finance, and that's agriculture and other things. And so on the other hand, we want to protect our environment and their pristineness. So there's a dilemma about the land, which is why we really appreciate double dipping or using the same land twice. And one of the things that is developing something called agrivoltaics. So we are, I'm sure you all know Tarek Abu Hamed, and he has been working with the Arizona University to develop agrivoltaics, which means solar panels above agriculture. So it could be greenhouse or it could be open spaces. And right now there are experiments that are dealing with building solar panels above various, obviously no date palms, but other vegetables that can grow. And what happens is that in addition to that twice using the land, the solar panels also provide shade. And in the hot weather of the Arava, you might be able to grow things that you weren't able to grow before. And also, solar panels efficiency can be reduced due to heat. But if you have agriculture below with a lot of moisture, it cools down the solar panels. So that's one of the ways forward. Miriam?
Kayla Niles asked a great question, which I can answer in part, and Ellie, you certainly can, is what does the Arava Institute recommend to assist Bedouins living in the Arava or living anywhere but off-grid? This is an important issue that Israel and its neighbors have to deal with. One of the inventions that it came out of Clive's workshop, and Ellie can talk to the socioeconomics and other things around this, but I can tell you we are experimenting with something called a green wall, which is a solar and water cleansing system that takes the gray water that is produced in these communities and keeps it from just kind of going into the ground, going into aquifers, going into streams. First of all, it cleans it, and second of all, it makes it available for agriculture and reuse. So it's a really important model that we are using in some Bedouin communities. We started on the family level, we want to move it to the community level, et cetera, and so forth. People have asked us about desal systems. They don't work, the water gen systems, they don't work in the Negev, it's just too dry. You have to have some level of air humidity for those systems to work. But Ellie, you can talk more about Bedouin in the Arava, clearly.
So the best answer I can give you is that the best thing you can do is invite Miri Lavi to give a talk, and she would give an amazing talk about Bedouins. That's her
We have.
speciality. We have, okay, all right. So the second thing is that there are no Bedouins in the Arava. Okay, there are no Bedouins. There used to be one family in the North Arava, far from Torah. The Bedouins live in the Negev, which is a little bit north and west of the Arava, but more in the mountain area. Let's say in the arid. There are no Bedouins in the hyper arid, only in the arid. The Arava Institute is perhaps the best place to develop off-grid system. So not just the solar panels, but the gray water recycling and all the other elements, biogas. And Tarek and Clive and others have been developing off-grid technology at the Arava Institute, including soon to have a village in a box, which will be a new neighborhood in the Arava Institute, which will be based on off-grid. And a lot of the Bedouins are off-grid by nature. So that is the interaction with them is great, but I think the fastest things growing in Israel, even more than desalination, is the culture of the Bedouins in Israel. These are very simple living people, but in a very Western society. So the changes in the Bedouin society are so dramatic, that I'm not sure off-grid always appeals to them. They just want to live in big cities. So it's a very complicated element. Imagine a culture that is based on having quite a lot of children with very poor medicine, and suddenly have extreme good medicine. What happens to that culture? So off-grid and Bedouins is not so simple.
And I just want to say, one of the things we did implement during COVID was that Clive was involved with measuring COVID in the wastewater in Bedouin communities to try to get medical and forestalling care into those communities at the first sign. As we all know, wastewater shows COVID before symptom. So they were able to sort of be exactly on what Elli's talking about, this conflict of science being brought to communities that are very fundamental to the way to nature and how they live. I'm going to take one more question, even though there are a few of them, and so please feel free to circle back with us or with Elli if you are so willing. Solar farms or agrivoltaics, which is Tarek's thing. There's a lot of talk about putting solar fields into Jordan, exchanging energy for water, but we're also experimenting with growing in the shade of solar systems, et cetera. Is there, there's clearly an ecological impact. How do you feel about that, Elli? What's your point of view?
So again, I'm sure a lot of the people here are already familiar with the fact that the regional council is now producing enough electricity just from solar panels, at least for the day. So solar is a big thing. Rachel, Miriam, have they heard Yossi Abramovich?
No,
so Yossi Abramovich made a Yosef Abramovich, you know who I'm talking about?
Yeah, of course I know who he is. I know him from back here. I used to live in Newton. No, just kidding.
Okay. So you should bring him over. And he
Sure.
he was the first person to start the whole issue of the solar panels and initiated APC, the Arava Power Company that the Arava Institute is part of. And he was working actually at the building of the Arava Institute. And so now, thanks to all those initiatives, the Arava Regional Council is producing enough electricity just from solar panels to maintain enough electricity during the day. And the big question now, and that's a question for Tarek, not for me, is what do you do during the night or during few cloudy days? And the issue is the storage. The storage is the big challenge, the next big challenge.
Yeah, I think it's if anyone finds a better answer than batteries or the perfect battery, I suggest we all invest in it because that will change the world. Thank you, Elli, so much.
I just want to say one more thing. We have to distinguish between ecology and environment. People think it's the same thing, and sometimes they are clashing with each other. For the sake of the environment, we need to stop burning coal and use wind power. But wind power kills birds. So sometimes we have interesting and challenging dilemmas where in order to have green electricity and to protect our environment, we are damaging the ecology, which is animals and plants and so on. So it's not exactly the same thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Elli, so much for sharing your wisdom with us, for bringing out so many interesting and thoughtful questions from our folks here, and teaching more about what our students learn at the Arava Institute. This is why we are able to launch alumni as leaders and future leaders in this field. We thank you all for your support as we head towards the end of the year. It's very valued, and your interest and wisdom. Thank you again for joining us. And we want to especially thank Rachel Durning. For those of you who joined many of these calls, she will be leaving us for graduate school after 4.5 years. And we really appreciate it. We've been asked that this recording will be shared. It is on Facebook Live. And if you want a recording, just get in touch with us, and we will be able to share that with you as well. Oh wait, Rachel answered it. It will be shared. Thank you so much. And our appreciation to Rachel, our appreciation to Elli, and appreciation to all of you for joining us.